For 64 years, the world called me Benito, and every time it felt like a thin blade cutting inside me, shaving pieces of who I was meant to be. If that first sentence touched you, I ask you something from the deepest part of me. Like this video and subscribe, it helps me keep sharing stories that might save someone out there. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Now let me return to my breast. My hair is white, falling to my shoulders, and my hands tremble even when I pour coffee from the pot. The tremor isn't sickness, it's memory. I've decided to open the window of this locked room that I am and let the air in. I don't need everyone to believe me. I only need to finally say my true name and set it on the table like fresh bread. My name is Benita Luz Garcia, and I'm 76 years old. I live in a modest apartment that looks out on a small square in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with laundry lines like little flags and the hum of a diner that smells of chili and coffee. In the mornings, I bake sweet bread to sell at the Saturday market. In the afternoons, I pick up my granddaughters from school and tell them stories that smell like lilacs and chalk dust. These days, I walk slowly, but I look straight ahead. Today, I speak in a low voice, like after Sunday supper, peeling old labels off a jar until the glass is clean. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking to be remembered as I am. I don't tell this for myself. I've survived most of what could hurt me, but for the child who right now might be hiding in the bathroom, swallowing tears to fit inside a costume that doesn't belong to them. I speak for the heart that each night picks its name up off the floor and hides it in the deepest drawer. To that child I say, you're not mistaken. The world is what confuses you, with its rushed rules and crooked clocks. I played the manual of what's right for decades, and the obedience cost me dearly. If I open my mouth now, it's to leave a trail of breadcrumbs so the wind won't scatter it. I rehearsed this story for years, sitting on the porch swing with the sun crawling slowly across the adobe wall. The porch has clay pots with stubborn geraniums, and the cracks in the wall look like maps of cities that no longer exist. When I close my eyes, I still hear church bells, footsteps on gravel, the murmurs of neighbors repeating recipes and secrets. And in that old music, a door creaks open inside me. I didn't keep it shut out of cowardice, but out of strategy. Sometimes silence is the only way to breathe without breaking your ribs on the inside. For too long I trained for the wrong performance. Jaw tight, shoulders square, marching gait, my voice 2 tones deeper than my throat wanted. They told me men don't cry, men don't paint their nails, men don't sway when a ranchera plays on the kitchen radio. I nodded, and inside I came apart like stale bread. I learned to laugh with my mouth, but never with my eyes. I kept my hands in my pockets so they wouldn't betray the music they knew. And every compliment about being proper was another nail in the coffin where they laid the girl I was. My father was a tailor, steady hands, scissors gleaming under a single bulb. After my mother died in childbirth, the house turned into a barracks. Cheap cologne on Sundays, mandatory mass, the empty chair that was more absence than furniture. He looked at me with the urgency of a man who needed a successor and shoved me toward the draft, like a boy who couldn't swim thrown into a river. "Stand straight," he ordered. "Men don't flinch." I learned to unstitch my tears from the inside, stitch by stitch, so no one could see them. That silence became my uniform. The reason I speak now isn't courage. It's exhaustion from fear. My body asked first, the trembling when I poured milk, the breath that caught halfway up the stairs, the throat that tested my name in a pharmacy whisper. Nothing exploded, only a strange peace, like opening a room that's been closed too many winters. I've learned that time doesn't heal if you keep the wound hidden. It only buries it. Today I choose to heal in daylight, clumsy but tender, like ironing an old tablecloth without burning it. I kept shoeboxes full of letters I never mailed and notebooks where I drew myself the way I longed to be, with floral scarves and painted lips. There's a faded blue ribbon inside that still beats when I touch it. I also kept names, the ones they gave me, and the one I saved in secret, folded like a relic. I don't expect justice from the past. It never answers the phone. What I expect is company. eyes that don't look away when the truth stands naked. Your company, if you're listening, is already a gift. I don't intend to resolve everything in one afternoon. Stories cooked on a slow flame need patient ears and deep breaths. Sometimes my voice will break. Sometimes I'll laugh without permission because joy, too, demanded its place, though it came late. If I say fear, don't worry. Fear is a hallway, not a house. If I say shame, remind me that blushing is blood moving, and therefore life. And if I say Benita, help me hear how it sounds so I can get used to its music. This opening is just the door. Behind it lie rooms I've never shown. I close this beginning with the calm of turning off the radio at dusk. My name is Benita, and today I am alive. If any child is listening from a cold kitchen, know this. There are tables where bread is served for two, and whole names can be spoken without fear. I promise no heroes, no miracles, only truth, which may be slower, but holds better. Let's open this chest together, let the air in, and if guilt's moths stir, we'll shake them out with open hands. This is my story, and at last it belongs to me. I remember my childhood as if it were painted in faded colors, warm but fragile, like an old postcard. We lived in a small town in northern New Mexico, where everyone knew each other's business, but few knew how to truly listen. Our home was simple. Wooden floors that creaked in winter, a wood-burning stove that smelled of smoke and beans, and windows that let in the desert dust when the wind rose. My mother's laughter was the song that held the walls together. She woke before dawn to make tortillas, humming low songs while the dough warmed under her hands. For me, those mornings were heaven, the smell of coffee, the hiss of the stove, the sense that nothing could break us. The kitchen was the center of life. Clay pots lined the shelves like old soldiers, and the air was always rich with chili, onions, and cumin. My mother, with her soft hands, seemed to command the room with love instead of orders. I would sit on a little stool, watching her grind corn on the metate, the sound rhythmic and soothing, like a lullaby in stone. Sometimes she sang verses from rancheras, her voice unpolished but true, filling the house more deeply than the fire ever could. I felt safe there, as if that kitchen could shield me from everything outside. My siblings and I invented games out of scraps. An old rope became a snake, a broken broomstick turned into a horse, and empty boxes were castles. I loved the afternoons when the sun lowered and the shadows stretched across the dirt yard. Under the shade of a cottonwood tree, we created whole kingdoms. My brother would always cast me as the brave cowboy, but in my heart I longed to be the lady in the bright dress, twirling with a ribbon in her hair. I never said it aloud. Instead, I carried the secret joy of imagining myself crowned in flowers. Sundays were different. We put on our best clothes, patched and pressed. My brother wore his stiff shirt, my sister, her hand-me-down dress, and I, the pants that always felt heavy on my skin. We walked together to the adobe church where bells rang out across the plaza. Inside, the smell of incense wrapped around us like smoke. I would watch the women in their shawls and delicate lace veils, the way they bowed gracefully, their earrings catching the candlelight. I ached quietly to be among them, to feel lace brush my shoulders, but I tucked the ache away, afraid even of my own longing. The seasons were our real calendar. Autumn brought crisp winds and the crunch of dry leaves under our shoes. Winter froze our bones. We huddled under thick wool blankets that scratched our skin, but kept us together. Spring brought blossoms from the apple trees on the edge of town, petals soft as secrets, and I would collect them to weave tiny crowns that I hid in my drawer. Summer was mercilessly hot, but it carried fiestas, music spilling into the night, fireworks cracking against the dark sky, and the scent of roasted corn and tamales filling the plaza. In those moments, life seemed endless. My mother was the sun in my childhood. I remember her hands dusted with flour as she stroked my hair, her eyes holding more tenderness than words could carry. She had a way of seeing through me, as if she understood what I couldn't speak. Sometimes when she braided my sister's hair, and I watched, yearning for the same touch, she would glance at me knowingly, with a small, secret smile. I wonder now if she already knew who I was, even when I had no words for it myself. My father, by contrast, was discipline carved into flesh. A tailor by trade, he spent long hours bent over cloth, scissors flashing under the single lamp in his workshop. From him I learned the smell of starch, the weight of silence. He was not cruel, but his distance froze the air. When he called me my heir, I forced a smile. Inside, it felt like being wrapped in a coat several sizes too big. Stiff, heavy, suffocating. It was a title I couldn't escape, and so I wore it, even though it never belonged to me. School was a cold stone building at the edge of town, desks carved with initials from generations past. There I discovered the magic of words. Reading became my escape. Every letter a doorway, every story a window. I copied words carefully, as if they were fragile ornaments. My teacher, Mrs. Chavez, was strict but fair. Once by accident, I wrote Benita on the top of my notebook instead of Benito. She paused, her gaze holding me longer than usual, but she didn't scold. That silence was a blessing, a quiet acknowledgement that let me dream without shame. The street games were another classroom. We chased rag balls, shared chocolate spread on bread, and ducked under porches when storms burst. Suddenly from the mountains, I watched the girls skip rope, their braids swinging, their laughter like bells. I longed to join them, to chant their songs, to feel the same lightness in my steps. But custom pulled me to the boys' side, where I stumbled clumsily over soccer games. Outwardly I played the part. Inside my heart was skipping rope. The town's fiestas were the highlight of the year. Banners of bright paper fluttered above the streets, drums echoed through the plaza, and booths overflowed with candy and roasted nuts. The Virgin's procession wound solemnly through the crowd, and people crossed themselves as if sealing a promise. Yet what transfixed me most were the women in embroidered dresses, their shawls flowing, their faces radiant. They looked like queens. I imagined myself among them, unseen but belonging. That vision carried me through many long nights. Summer nights in our town had a magic all their own. We slept with the windows open, and the chorus of crickets sang us into dreams. Sometimes I lay awake, staring at the endless desert sky, tracing constellations my mother taught me. Each star is a wish, she'd say, and I always made the same one, to be myself someday in the light of day. Night after night, I whispered that wish to the sky until sleep pulled me under. Saturdays meant the market, a world of colors and smells. The sharp tang of fresh chili, the briny scent of olives, the sweet fragrance of bread still warm. Vendors shouted prices. Women bargained with skill. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I loved drifting past the fabric stalls most of all, running my fingers over cottons and silks, imagining dresses that swirled around me in colors I dared not speak aloud. Touching those fabrics felt like touching a future I wasn't allowed to name. There was a secret language only I understood. Shadows on the adobe walls became shapes of who I wished to be. The water in the town's well reflected a gentler face than the mirror at home. Songs hummed under my breath, transformed into hymns about me. This hidden world was my shelter, a place where I could exist without judgment. Even though I didn't yet understand what it meant, I clung to the certainty that there was more to me than what anyone else saw. Rainy days were my sanctuary. The house smelled of damp earth and simmering beans, and I could retreat under the blankets with my imagination. The drumming rain on the tin roof was steady, protective. In those hours, I created stories in which I wore what I wanted, laughed without fear, moved freely. Storms outside made me feel safe inside because they drowned out everything else. I still think of rain as a shield. My siblings were my anchor. With my sister, I shared games and whispered secrets. With my brother, silences and unspoken loyalty. We were three mismatched pieces that somehow fit. We argued, of course, but always ended pressed together on the same bed, our giggles chasing away the shadows. They didn't know fully who I was, but they loved me anyway. That love was my shelter, stronger than any walls. Snack times were treasures. Bread with butter and sugar, eaten sitting on the steps, knees scraped, fingers sticky. We laughed easily, at nothing in particular. In those moments, the storm inside me felt far away. Childhood had a strange power. It could wrap even the deepest ache in sweetness, at least for a little while. Seasons passed quickly. Clothes grew too small. Games changed. Responsibilities crept in. But my secret remained, tucked deeper with every year. I learned to wrap myself in silence, like a shawl both protective and suffocating. I didn't yet have words for it, but I knew joy had a price. Still, childhood let me pretend everything could last forever. That illusion carried me through. Sometimes I look back and wonder if those years were an illusion, a fragile bubble floating before the storm. There was pain already, yes, but it hadn't yet found its full voice. Life was sweet, in small, ordinary ways, and those ordinary joys made me believe happiness could be enough. My childhood was a calm river before the flood, and when I close my eyes, I can still feel its current carrying me innocent toward what would come next. The day everything broke began in silence, mid-morning, when my mother doubled over in pain. The basin of water she had been using stilled, and a sharp metallic smell filled the air. My brother ran for the neighbor sent for the town. Doctor, but the car never came quickly enough. Church bells rang as if it were a feast day, mocking our grief. I held my mother's hand, warm, slippery, and she looked at me as if handing me a key to a door I didn't yet know how to open. When the doctor finally shook his head and said, "She's gone," the plates in the cupboard rattled. My father did not cry. He stood with his jacket in hand, eyes fixed on something beyond the room. The wake filled our house with murmurs and the clatter of rosary. Beads, coffee bitter as the ash was poured into chipped cups, candles flickered against adobe walls, and the smell of wax mixed with perfume too cheap to cover grief. My mother's body lay in the living room, surrounded by shadows that danced against the walls. Neighbors whispered as if soft voices could soften death. I smoothed a stray lock of her hair, the one that always escaped her braid, and bit my tongue to keep from begging her to wake up. My sister cried like a bird drenched in rain. My brother clenched his jaw so tightly I feared it might crack. By the end of the night, the house was larger and I was smaller. The morning after the burial, my father shut the tailor shop in town and remade our house into his workshop. He shoved aside the big table, chalked lines on the wall, laid his scissors on oilcloth like a set of weapons. "Nothing wasted, you. Stay to help," he said, cutting my name down to a single syllable. That was the first time he stripped me of sweetness. Something shifted in his breathing, a gear clicked, and there was no going back. The kitchen, once smelling of beans and spice, became a factory of silence. The clock ticked louder than ever, and I learned not to breathe too heavily. Grief was scheduled like chores. Songs disappeared into drawers, the good tablecloth locked away, the cottonwood tree in the yard left barren of laughter. My father nailed a calendar to the wall and penciled in shifts: school, workshop, errands, cleaning. "Joy insults the dead," he declared, and I had no reply. He cut my hair short to save pins, and my flower crowns shriveled, forgotten. At night, the empty place at the table was a hole through which cold air entered. Breathing deeply hurt, as if absence itself had made a nest in my chest. Outdoors, life marched on. The baker asked, "How are you?" in a tone too hurried to mean it. The priest preached about God's will and hurried off to another family. Friends of my mother dropped by with casseroles and instructions. "Your father needs order and you need discipline." No one asked about my hands, already smelling of starch and dye, or my sister who slept with her fists clenched like a child gripping broken dreams. The Saturday market smelled again of chili and bread, reminding me that the world spins mercilessly, whether you can stand or not. Inside the house, my father spoke only in commands. Stand straight. Look a man in the eyes. The air learns by watching. He draped jackets in progress. They crossed my shoulders, their weight heavier than fabric, their seams biting into me like expectations. This is how a man carries himself, he repeated, pacing around me with measuring tape. The cloth no longer promised dresses in bright colors. It was the uniform of a country I did not belong to. Each stitch pulled a thread out of my soul, unraveling something sacred I didn't know how to protect. School fell into the background. Mrs. Chavez, my teacher, looked at me with pity for a few weeks, but soon the homework piled high. I wrote late into the night under a buzzing bulb that made the shadows twitch. Games vanished from my afternoons. No more skipping rope, no more river walks. Help at home was the excuse. My friends stopped insisting. I walked home in a straight line, like tracks laid in stone, already bracing myself for chalk, scissors, and his eyes measuring me like cloth on a table. My sister began to cling to me for comfort, searching for me with her nightmares and hunger. I braided her hair quickly, hands trembling, watching the door. My brother hardened overnight, hauled rolls of fabric and delivered orders across town. We all aged years in days, without celebration, without photographs. At night, the three of us huddled in the same bed, whispering stories into the dark as if weaving a net to hold us together. That was our pact, to carry each other quietly, like beams in a roof that no one notices. Loneliness calcified into routine. My father ceased being a man and became a system. Orders, silences, corrections, a raised eyebrow sharper than a whip. Neighbors dropped by with jokes, and he smiled only with his skin, never with his eyes. I studied him the way one studies storm clouds. The twitch in his jaw, the scrape of scissors against fabric, the pause before speaking my shortened name. Fear became a permanent resident, tiptoeing through the house. It sat at the head of the table and counted our breaths. One day he brought home a full-length mirror, the kind tailors use for fittings, and set it in the living room. From now on, you'll stand here for clients, he ordered. Dignity is geometry. In the reflection, I was already fading, half child, half mannequin. The mirror became my prison wall, showing me someone I didn't recognize. I didn't know it then, but that mirror marked the boundary where my name began to vanish. Safety was gone. In its place grew an order that opened the door to a danger I couldn't yet name. My father took over. The house the way a general claims a battlefield. He taped schedules to the refrigerator, reassigned our seats at the table. I to his right, my brother opposite me, my sister pushed toward the wall, and spread his workshop across the living room. His scissors rested in neat rows like knives in parade. I'm in charge here, he said once, softly, and it was worse than a shout. The words hung over us like a ceiling beam ready to fall. That day I realized we no longer lived in a home, but in his version of one, and my body would have to learn new borders just to survive. It began with my name, because names are doors. At first he cut it down to Ben. Soon it was just you. He forbade me from singing in the kitchen, from braiding my sister's hair like girls do, from lingering at the shop windows where lace and ribbons shimmered. He assigned roles with the precision of chalk marks. I cut thread, carried orders, measured cloth. Softness is a luxury, he muttered, watching my hands as if they held a flaw he had to hammer out. In his world, curves disappeared, and I, born of curves, learned to walk in angles. The mirror became a tribunal. He planted me in front of it, draping half-finished jackets over my shoulders. Hold yourself steady, he commanded, circling me with his tape measure, his breath warm at my ear. I learned to stare at my reflection without recognition, as if it belonged to a stranger. A tilted hip, a gentle gesture. He corrected it with a snap of his tongue, or a sharp tap on my spine. By day's end, my muscles burned, and shame clung to my skin like starch. He moved next to my closet. The few ribbons and small treasures I had were tossed into the fire. My hair was cut practical, scissors chopping through like autumn wind stripping branches. The first time he saw me cross my legs, like a girl, his hand cracked across my knee. It wasn't the sting that stayed with me, but the silence afterward, heavy and suffocating. Rules for men, he declared. Speak little, look directly, never cry. That was the day I began a new education, one I never asked for. He armed himself with religion. On Sundays, his hand pressed down on my neck as we sat in church, forcing my chin toward the altar. The priest spoke of sin and nature's order, words my father repeated as law. After Mass, he shoved me into confession, as though my soul were a suit to be repaired. I invented sins to match his expectations, leaving the booth guilty of things I hadn't done. Faith, which had been comfort with my mother, became a muzzle. Prayers turned into stitches pulled too tight. Outside, his mask was impeccable. The town saw the skilled tailor who lent credit to widows, who greeted the sheriff with a nod, who poured a cordial glass of whiskey for clients. Neighbors called him a serious man, with respect in their voices. I watched him pass out smiles like pressed garments and understood the cruelest rule. No one would believe me if I ever spoke. His web of favors covered the town like a quilt. I was just a hidden stitch, invisible to anyone who didn't bother to turn it over. Nights became inspections. 2 knocks on my door, then it opened whether I answered or not. He rifled through my notebooks, checked my pockets, searched my drawers. Sometimes he sat too close, asking questions that weren't really questions. Who are you when I'm not looking? I learned to answer with one-word replies, holding my breath until my ribs ached. I could tell his mood by the weight of his footsteps in the hallway. The pillow smelled of fear. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. The first blow that left a mark came disguised as correction. My sister wore a ribbon I had tied in her hair to chase away a nightmare. He saw it and clamped my wrist between 2 fingers until the world shrank to pain. Hands are for work, not for foolishness, he said. For days the skin pulsed each time I moved. I began holding things only with my fingertips, as if they were made of glass. No apology followed, only a new rule. I was never to touch her hair again. The prohibitions multiplied like seasons. I was banned from skipping rope with the girls, forced into soccer games where my clumsiness became spectacle. He dragged me to the rodeo and made me watch the blood stain the dirt. Learn courage, he said. I felt nausea rising and fixed my eyes instead on a woman's shawl in the stands. At home, he echoed the scene. A man doesn't break. Inside, I was breaking, shard by shard. He played with denial, twisting truth into shadows. I saw you walk foolishly, he'd accuse. If I denied it, he smirked. Then I saw you think it. He claimed I had done things I hadn't, and when I defended myself, he bent my memory until I doubted it. You're pathetic, he would conclude calmly. I left those conversations as though I'd been locked in a room without windows, unable to tell day from night. His voice warped mine until I didn't know which belonged to me. Sometimes, he rewarded me to keep the cage looking like a home. He bought me stiff leather boots to walk like a man. They rubbed my ankles raw, but he made me parade down the hallway. Each step burned, but I nodded, searching his face for approval like a dog waiting for a pat. His affection had its own economy. 5 insults for 1 smile, a humiliation for every crumb of kindness. That arithmetic kept me obedient longer than I care to admit. Money became another leash. Every dollar earned from his clients was recorded in a green notebook alongside my mistakes. If I bought even a pencil with glitter, it became debt. The market stalls were no longer treasure chests, but reminders of things that were forbidden. Sometimes I slipped a pretty button into my pocket, a stolen token I could hold in secret. Resistance reduced to crumbs. One winter afternoon, while I fitted a customer, he looped the measuring tape around my neck and tugged lightly. A joke. Too thin, he muttered, pulling until sparks exploded in my temples. Make your voice stronger. The client chuckled. I laughed too, because laughter was armor. My hands shook afterward. I hid them in fabric. That day I learned pain can disguise itself as trade. Tears became contraband. If they welled up, he sent me to bed without dinner. Hunger teaches more than pity, he said. The first night I counted the cracks in the wall to distract myself. The second I told myself stories in the shadows. By the third, I stopped hoping for the door to open. The fourth, I learned to sleep with my eyes open, fooling the darkness into thinking I wasn't there. Public humiliation came at a town fiesta. Music blared in the plaza, girls spinning in skirts like bells. I was staring when his hand clamped down on my neck. "Dance, boy," he ordered, shoving me into the circle of laughing boys. He twisted my shoulders until I stumbled through the steps. "Stronger," he hissed, his nails biting into my arm. People clapped, amused. Shame burned, hotter than firecrackers, and I avoided that plaza for weeks, sure the stones remembered my missteps. He began locking cabinets. One evening he found my hidden notebooks, filled with dresses sketched in blue ink, the name Benita written over and over. He sat in silence, tearing them page by page. The sound of ripping still echoes in me. He fed them to the fire. "Undisciplined imagination makes you sick," he said. I rescued a charred scrap, hid it under my tongue until it dissolved like bitter communion. The silence of others wrapped him in protection. When a neighbor noticed my bruised arms, she muttered that boys these days are too soft. Mrs. Chavez looked at me once with suspicion, ready to ask. But the next day, my father arrived with a mended suit and a smile. "He's been tired, working hard," he explained. She nodded, torn. I learned then that the world sometimes prefers silence so it can keep opening its shops each morning. A new rule emerged. Every time he entered the room, I had to rise, shake his hand firmly, hold his gaze. If I faltered, his wooden yardstick snapped against my ankles. My sister began hiding behind doors when she heard his steps. My brother deepened his voice, copying him. Our house turned into a stage where each of us wore masks. Mine grew heavier each day. He enforced dawn routines, cold morning runs through dirt paths, leather boots cutting into my skin. "Build your chest," he barked. Then icy water over my head, stabbing my spine. In between, lectures. Respect comes to men who demand it. I shivered and nodded, dreaming only of the warmth of the shared bed with my siblings. My survival depended on separating body from soul. He used threats as leverage. "If you don't toughen up, your sister goes to live with your aunt," he said one night casually. That was enough. I buried every trace of softness, perfecting tasks, lowering my voice, erasing myself. My sister's eyes anchored me. If the price of keeping her close was sacrificing myself, I paid it without question. It wasn't heroism, it was necessity. Sometimes he relaxed his role, arriving with sweet bread or chocolate. For a moment the house exhaled and laughter peeked in. Then he sealed the lesson. "See, when you behave, life is easier." The kindness was another leash, velvet but tight. I went to bed with sugar on my tongue and chains in my chest. At night the sound of keys turning in locks haunted me. He walked the house, bolting doors, metal against metal. "Safety first," he said. But safety smelled like vinegar and prison. His footsteps paused outside my door, breath lingering. I counted to 100, eyes open, waiting for him to pass. Danger had learned a new name, not only his hands, but his shadow. One afternoon after school, a client slapped my back, laughing. "He's becoming a man," he said. My father smiled proudly. I bit my tongue until it bled. In that moment I saw the reach of his disguise. The world believed in the costume he'd sewn on me. No one would ask about the girl hidden beneath if the suit looked neat. Even the light seemed fooled. The longest night came after I ruined a sleeve with a shaky cut. He didn't shout. He approached slowly, resting heavy hands on my shoulders, squeezing just enough to remind me who owned my breath. "No soft hands," he murmured. The air grew thick. The sewing machine stood silent. When he released me, my eyelids trembled. No one saw. No one ever would. From then on, every stitch carried a silent prayer that the thread wouldn't snap and bring the darkness down again. And yet, in the cracks of his control, I began to notice small signs. A shop girl pressing a piece of soft fabric into my hand, whispering, "Smooth, isn't it?" Mrs. Chavez slipping me a book about women poets. Teresa, the neighbor, meeting my eyes with quiet understanding. My father still filled the house, but the floor was beginning to fissure. In those fractures I heard a quiet voice, my own, gathering strength for the silence and for what would come after. I woke earlier than the sun, trying to stay ahead of fear. I swept the dusty floor, set beans to simmer, left bread and black coffee ready exactly how he liked it. Routine became my spell. If every item was in its place, his temper might stay sheathed, and my siblings could breathe. Out the small kitchen window, dawn stretched pale over the desert, and I whispered to myself, one more morning means one more brick in the bridge to survival. I no longer dreamed of happiness. I dreamed only of making it to nightfall intact. Silence wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. I became a master of shrinking. I walked, brushing the walls, bent corners without sound, even slowed my breathing when his footsteps echoed down the hall. I memorized which floorboards groaned, which shadows could hide me. Invisibility was a coat I slipped on at dawn and shed only at midnight, exhausted. I learned to be present without being there, as if my soul waited outside while my body performed. You can't hit what doesn't exist. You can't control what doesn't emit. So I perfected the art of being absent while standing in plain sight. With my sister, tenderness turned into a covert operation. I warmed her milk with cinnamon quietly, hid her rag doll in the false bottom of the trunk, braided her hair only at safe hours. When night brought fear to her eyes, I taught her to breathe in 4 counts and promised whispered stories. We hid blue ribbons for stolen Sundays when the house wasn't watching. She learned my signals. 2 taps on the table meant she could laugh. 1 touch on the elbow meant eyes down. We were 2 castaways making flags out of scraps. My brother hardened, so I softened to protect him. When he mimicked father's voice, pretending not to fear, I steered him toward errands. Take the package, I'll finish the cutting. I shouldered small mistakes so he wouldn't. At night, when he closed his eyes but still looked tense, I listed the things we could. Still control. Share the bread, leave water for sparrows, switch off the radio if it hurt. Sometimes I watched him sleep with his brow furrowed and felt a quiet rage. It gave me strength for morning. My body began to speak the words I couldn't. Sleep grew narrow, nights stretched wide. I counted ceiling cracks like rosary beads. When exhaustion finally dragged me under, I woke with burning shoulders and a tight chest. I wore baggy shirts, long sleeves in July, sweaters that swallowed me whole. My reflection became a stranger. Any softness shown toward myself felt dangerous. So I looked away from mirrors and dressed in clothes that made me vanish. I mapped hiding places like a cartographer. Under the stairs, behind laundry buckets, I fit my breath. On the roof, behind sheets flapping in the wind, I claimed a patch of sky. In the church, shadows near St. Joseph let me think freely. At the library, the scent of old paper held me steady. I didn't hide because of shame. I hid to recharge, to build quiet pockets of survival. School became on and off terrain. I arrived with dark circles, notebooks late, mind absent. Mrs. Chavez noticed, but when she asked, I gave excuses. Shop work, errands, headaches. I read quickly, wrote neatly, but like someone else's hand was guiding me. Once, she placed homework in my palm and hesitated, eyes meeting mine, seeing more than I said. She let me go without comment. That silence felt like a hand pressed gently against my back. At home, I studied. Him like weather. The twitch in his jaw, the slam of drawers, the pace of his steps told me storms before they hit. Afternoons of siesta were most dangerous. I invented errands, parsley from the market, thread from the shop, a book returned that hadn't been borrowed. The plan was simple, never be where his gaze fell. If I became wall, he couldn't pierce me. The kitchen was my secret language. Onions caramelizing hummed lullabies, Slow stew taught patience. Thursday cookies became guerrilla. Rituals. I sweetened air with sugar and citrus peel, and even he sometimes breathed calmer without knowing why. Food became my coded message. Extra beans for my brother after work. A piece of candy slipped into my sister's pocket. I couldn't say I love you, but I could keep them fed. My body carried bruises like whispers. I taught myself remedies in the bathroom mirror. Potato slices for swelling, cold cloth for dizziness. I bought arnica cream with hidden coins and stuffed it inside a sock. Collars buttoned to the top, scarves for winter's disguise. Nobody asked questions. Nobody saw. To the mirror, I whispered encouragements. One less day, then I buttoned myself shut again. Acting became survival. Outside, I smiled the exact amount, said thank you without trembling, bowed my head in church convincingly. Neighbors praised me as so polite. They saw the frame, never the picture. If questions brushed too close, I diverted with weather or food prices. I didn't want pity. I wanted time. The mask protected my siblings. The mask bought us another day. I wrote letters addressed to Dear Benita. Each one described small victories. Soup simmering, steps counted, sunlight touching sheets. I folded them and hid them in a tin box under the cottonwood tree. They weren't for the world. They were postcards to my future self. Hold on, they said. You're real. That tree, watered by secret words, grew taller each year. When my sister dreamed of monsters, I taught her a ritual. Feet. On the ground, hand on wood, name 3 smells of home. Soap, stew, flowers, we recited until her breath slowed. We made up a private language of blinks and half smiles. One night she begged for a song, so I sang a broken verse. She fell asleep with her mouth slightly open. I sat guard, promising the dark it would not take her. My brother came home some nights with scraped knuckles and a shirt stinking of labor. I heated water, cleaned wounds, blew on them softly. I didn't ask why. I fed him. Bread with oil instead. He sometimes dropped his head onto the table like a stone. I slid food under his hand silently. That was our truce. Eat before speaking. Money became my rebellion. I stashed nickels in a skirt hem, sold extra cookies at the market, saved for bandages and one hard-bound notebook. In that notebook, I listed victories. When he was human for a moment, when I dodged a blow, when my siblings laughed. An inventory of survival, proof we weren't only bruises. Church shifted too. Ye lit candles for my mother and for nameless women swallowing tears. I didn't pray for miracles, just for patience and another inch of strength. Sometimes another woman lit a candle nearby, and our eyes met. We nodded. That nod carried more comfort than any sermon. Faith became not obedience, but solidarity. Winter came, harsh and expected. Hands cracked peeling potatoes, water bit, clothes stiffened on the line. The house smelled of damp wool. We huddled around the coal stove. I told stories about warmth returning, spring blossoms, future summers. I wasn't lying. Hope was my recipe. I spooned it into their bowls like broth. At school, Pilar kept walking with me. She gave me notes, jokes, and once a magazine clipping of women writers. Read it in the bathroom, she teased. I folded it like treasure, hiding it in my book. Her presence was a lifeline. No demands, no questions, just existence beside mine. I learned the power of a friend who didn't insist, only stayed. I practiced the disguise until it felt second nature. I lowered my voice, squared my shoulders, shortened my sentences. Every action went through an internal checkpoint. Is it safe? The cost was high. I buried my laughter, strangled my songs, swallowed my tears. I became skilled at shutting myself off like a switch. I promised not to forget where the switch was hidden. The ritual of keys haunted my nights. His walk through the house, locking each door, metal grinding into silence. Safety first, he muttered. Safety smelled like vinegar and prison. His steps paused outside my door, breath heavy. I counted to 100, refusing to blink, waiting until he left. The sound of those keys became a second heartbeat. Clothes became allies. Oversized shirts, sweaters that concealed tremors, hidden stitches of pink thread along a skirt hem. That secret detail anchored me. On hard days, I touched it with my fingertip and remembered my whole name. It was proof I still existed beneath the disguise. My stomach became its own battlefield. Fire one day, knots the next. The pharmacist sold me chamomile and anise, scribbling notes on paper bags. Twice daily, with calm. She slipped me a box of bandages once, no charge. I used them like holy relics, covering wounds both visible and invisible. Her quiet care reminded me my body still belonged to me. Some afternoons I sat in the bathroom sorting buttons, by size, by shine, by color. I chose one, tucked it in my pocket as a talisman. A button looks like nothing, yet it steadied me. Holding its cold curve made me believe in small circles of safety. When my sister had her first period, she panicked, thinking she was dying. I improvised with cloths, warm water, whispered comfort. I scraped together coins for cotton, trembling at the risk of discovery. We survived that secret together, proud and scared. We slept pressed close. Her new womanhood a door I swore to guard. My brother once spoke of leaving for work in another state. My bones turned to dust. I begged with practical excuses, but inside I begged for his presence. He stayed a while longer. That promise became my inner clock, ticking louder each day. At the dinner table, I invented rituals of light, talking about market fruit, neighbor births, dogs doing tricks. My siblings smiled. Sometimes even father added a story. For minutes, the table felt like a table. I stored those moments like coins in a tin. Mirrors became tools, not enemies. I practiced a neutral face, a posture that drew no anger. I whispered to the reflection, I won't abandon you. It wasn't beauty I sought, but survival. My vocabulary shrank. I saved want, hurt, and no deep inside. I spoke in safe words. Yes, done, now. My silence was not resignation. It was conservation. I was storing words for the day I would need them most. At times, rage erupted. I scrubbed floors until the tiles gleamed as if to erase his footprints. Or I sewed until dawn, each stitch proof that broken fabric could be remade. That lesson carried me. Dignity can be pieced together. I learned to pray without language, holding a chipped mug, forehead against cool glass, whispering tomorrow. That was enough. Tomorrow meant life, and life meant the chance to escape. Over time, I knew the house like a chessboard. Which phrase softened him, which movement avoided danger, which smile shielded my siblings. But I also saw the trap. Silence protected us, but it also caged me. To speak would risk collapse. To stay. Silent meant dying slowly. I lived balanced on that knife's edge, carrying water in a fragile jar. Each step completed was another day intact. Each silence held a scream, waiting for the moment it would finally break. My resistance began quietly, like seeds under frozen ground. I promised myself one small act each day, something only I would know. Some mornings I hummed a fragment of a song while hanging sheets, so softly it melted into the wind. Other times I placed a wildflower in a water glass on the kitchen table, pretending it was decoration but secretly claiming space. These gestures were invisible to him, yet they stitched me back together. Each was a whisper to myself. I'm still here. Pilar became my mailbox with legs. After school, she handed me magazine clippings folded into tiny squares, sometimes a poem, sometimes a picture of a dress. For later, she'd say, winking. Once she loaned me a scarf the color of grapes. I didn't dare wear it at home, but I hid it in a book. At night when the house slept, I unfolded it, inhaling the scent of soap. That scarf was more than fabric. It was evidence that another world existed waiting for me. Needles and scraps became my secret rebellion. I rescued bits of fabric from the trash and stitched them into a hidden lining under my blouses. A triangle of lace here, a strip of soft cotton there. He never saw. The world saw ordinary shirts. but I walked carrying a small secret comfort against my skin. Each stitch whispered, "Survive." Each hidden patch was a page in the story I was writing beneath his rules. Mrs. Chavez, my teacher, noticed I was slipping away. One afternoon, she pressed a thin book into my hand. Poems by Emily Dickinson. "Windows," she said, without explanation. I read them in the bathroom with my feet braced against the door. Her words, about hope, about silence, about courage, flowed into me like fresh water. I copied verses into my notebook, repeating them while sweeping or stirring soup. They became spells against despair. Teresa, the neighbor, offered comfort without asking questions. She would hand me an anise candy at church or remark, "Sometimes you just need air," with a knowing look. One Sunday, as candles flickered, she murmured, "Tight spaces don't last forever." The words lodged inside me like a promise. For the first time, I believed maybe she could see through the walls. Her quiet presence was like a lantern left outside our window. Small, steady, enough to remind me you weren't invisible. At night, in the storeroom, I practiced my true voice. I whispered my real name into the dark, Benita. At first it felt strange, like speaking a foreign word. Then it began to sound natural, almost sweet. I tried out "no" too, letting it roll in my throat. Though no one heard, each rehearsal made me stronger. I wasn't preparing only for survival anymore. I was preparing for a day of truth. Timing became another form of defiance. I shifted clocks 5 minutes ahead so I could slip away to the store before his footsteps reached the hallway. I volunteered for errands that took me across town, to places where laughter filled the air and no one knew me as his heir. I returned with careful accounts and exact change, which kept suspicion away. But inside, those stolen moments were breaths of freedom, and they fed me more than food ever did. I mapped escape routes in my head. How many steps from my room to the front door? How long the lock took to turn? I hid coins in 3 different places, under a rug, inside a cracked mug, stitched into a hem. I memorized the way to Teresa's house, rehearsed her name on my lips. It wasn't that I planned to run that night or the next. It was that imagining it made me feel less chained. Even fantasies can be rehearsal for freedom. The pharmacist, a quiet woman with sharp eyes, began slipping me kindness disguised as medicine. On a paper bag she wrote, "Take with calm." Once she tucked in a box of bandages for hard-working hands. She had seen more than she said. Her discreet care gave me back a sense of ownership over my body. When I placed a bandage on a cut, it wasn't just covering skin, it was covering shame. Paula, the seamstress upstairs, once caught me staring at a polka-dot dress on her balcony. She asked if I knew how to sew buttonholes. When I nodded, she handed me fabric scraps for practice. We sewed together for half an hour, in silence, as if sewing itself were language enough. Before I left, she slipped elastic ribbon into my pocket. "You never know," she said. Those words echoed like a secret blessing. I started turning his discipline against him. I offered to deliver orders across town to visit suppliers. He believed it was eagerness. In truth, it gave me an hour by the river. I sat on a stone, watching the current rush over rocks, and repeated to myself, "Water doesn't ask permission." I returned, smelling faintly of wet earth, my soul a little less caged. By then, I could predict his moods, like seasons. Mondays brought anger, Wednesdays carried liquor on his breath, Saturdays inflated his pride. I used this knowledge like armor. Avoid him on Mondays, perfect my tasks on Saturdays, vanish on Wednesdays. It wasn't escape, but it kept us alive. Turning fear into statistics gave me a thin edge of power. My siblings and I perfected our signals. 2 taps on the table. Smile, keep quiet. 3 on the doorframe. Danger. If I asked for small scissors, it meant hide in the yard until he called. We even carried tiny tokens, buttons I'd given them, as charms. My sister called hers Moon, my brother Ball. Holding those pieces steadied us, proof we belonged to each other before we belonged to him. The greatest victory came one night in secret. With scraps from Paula, I sewed a plain white slip, delicate straps and all. It took weeks of hidden work. One afternoon, when the house was empty, I slipped it on and stood before the mirror. For the first time, I saw myself, not disguised, not fractured, just me. The fabric touched my skin like forgiveness. I quickly folded it away, heart pounding. But I returned to my chores with a calm I hadn't known in years. I had touched freedom, and it was real. The day it all broke began like any other. Beans simmering on the stove, scissors clicking in the workshop, my siblings whispering in the kitchen. But midday carried a strange heaviness, like the air before a storm. I was bent over gathering stray threads when his shadow fell across me. He stood so close the temperature changed. He didn't speak at first. He simply laid his hands on my shoulders, heavier than usual. The measuring tape hung from his neck like a coiled snake. Even the flies seemed to pause, as if waiting. He spun me toward the full-length mirror. "Look," he ordered. His grip tightened on my arm. I tried to hold my posture as he demanded, but my knees shook. "You still haven't learned," he muttered, leaning too close, his breath fogging the glass. Stared at the reflection. Not a child, not myself, but some ghostly mannequin. Something inside me snapped. I knew, with a clarity that burned, that he was about to cross a line darker than any before. I heard my siblings in the kitchen. If I screamed, they would come. If I stayed silent, maybe it would pass. The choice crushed me in seconds. He raised the tape toward my neck, a gesture familiar from before. But now it was different. No customers, no witnesses. Terror surged through me, but beneath it, another current rose. Rage. It surged hot, uncontrollable, washing over years of silence. I couldn't let him brand this moment into us. My mouth opened and a single word tore out. "Stop!" The word struck the air like lightning. He froze, surprised, as if he didn't recognize my voice. His grip loosened just enough. I shoved him back, not with strength, but with desperation. The space between us opened. I bolted into the kitchen, heart hammering, my siblings staring wide-eyed. "My!" Sister dropped the pitcher of water. Glass shattered on the floor, sparkling like warning bells. She clung to me instantly. My brother stepped forward, placing himself between us and Father. Father entered, fury twisting his face. But my brother didn't move aside. "No more," he said, voice trembling but firm. Father's arm lifted, but my brother caught his wrist mid-air. For a second, time stopped. It wasn't the blow that mattered. It was the defiance. The room became a battlefield. But for once, we weren't soldiers under his command. He looked smaller in that moment, not invincible, just a man. The noise drew Teresa, our neighbor, who knocked firmly at the door. "Everything all right in there?" Her voice sliced the tension. Father hesitated, his mask flickering. "All fine," he barked, but the words rang hollow. I rushed to open the door. Teresa stepped in, her eyes sweeping the scene. The broken glass, my sister's tears, the bruise already blooming on my arm. She didn't ask questions. She stood there steady, her presence a crack of light in our darkness. With her there, the power shifted. Father stepped back, muttering, retreating to his workshop. The room exhaled all at once. My siblings clung to me. Teresa stayed until evening, sipping coffee, talking about weather, refusing to leave us alone. Nothing explicit was said, but everything had changed. A witness had seen. Silence no longer ruled unchallenged. That night the house felt different. Not peaceful yet, but hollowed, as if the foundation had cracked. We huddled in bed together, our breaths sinking in the dark. I lay awake, pain throbbing in my arm, but relief stronger. The word "stop" echoed in my chest like a bell that couldn't be unrung. I had feared it would kill us to speak. Instead, it had saved us. The next morning he avoided us, slipping out early with disheveled clothes and empty eyes. He didn't bark orders. He didn't touch us. The house breathed lighter, as though some unseen weight had lifted. We ate. Breakfast slowly, daring to laugh at crumbs on the table. Teresa stopped by with oranges, setting them on the counter without comment. Her eyes said, You're not alone anymore. For days his presence shrank. He moved like a man haunted, not a ruler. He shut himself in the workshop, emerging only for meals. We filled the silence with our own voices, humming small jokes, the scrape of chairs without fear. For the first time in years, I felt my chest expand without tightness. I realized then that courage doesn't mean absence of fear. It means standing even while shaking. My voice, once buried under years of silence, had finally risen, and it had shifted everything. My siblings saw it too. The house was still fragile, danger not erased, but we had crossed a line. We could never go fully back into silence. That night, as the stars spread across the New Mexico sky, I whispered my name aloud in bed, not into a pillow, not in secret, but out loud enough for my siblings to hear. Benita. My sister reached for my hand. My brother exhaled deeply, as if he'd been waiting for that sound. The name hovered in the room like incense, fragile but holy. For the first time, I felt the possibility of life beyond his walls. I slept lightly, but with a smile. Something irreversible had happened. Silence was no longer my only weapon. Voice had entered the battle, and once spoken, truth never retreats. The morning after our defiance, light poured through the windows differently, softer, as if even the sun had noticed. We sat together at the kitchen table, eating slowly without the usual tightness in our throats. My sister giggled at a crumb that stuck to my brother's lip, and instead of shushing her, I laughed too. It was the first true laugh I'd let escape in years. The house still held shadows, but now it also held something new, the sound of us. My father returned that night with shoulders slumped. His authority cracked. He walked past us without a word, locking himself in his workshop. The door shut, but it no longer sealed the air. His silence wasn't control anymore. It was retreat. For once, we didn't shrink. We cleared the table, washed dishes, and filled the room with our own noise. It felt like a revolution, disguised as an ordinary evening. Freedom didn't arrive in one grand gesture. It came in fragments. The way my sister hummed while folding laundry, the way my brother whistled out of tune, the way I dared to write Benita boldly across the first page of a new notebook. Each act was small, but together they wove a different fabric. We were no longer invisible threads in his design. We were stitching ourselves into our own pattern. One night, when the house was quiet, I put on the white slip I had sewn in secret. Standing before the mirror, I saw myself fully for the first time. The reflection didn't frighten me. It soothed me. Tears slid down my cheeks, not from shame, but from relief. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "You made it." The mirror, once my prison, had become my witness. Teresa visited often, carrying fruit, staying for coffee, chatting about ordinary things. Her presence reminded us we weren't isolated anymore. Once, while peeling an orange, she looked straight at me and said softly, "You've already begun." I didn't answer, but inside I knew she was right. The transformation wasn't loud, but it was alive. The town kept moving, markets, masses, fiestas, but I moved differently through it. My head lifted higher, my eyes held longer. People might have whispered, but their voices no longer caged me. The real sentence had been silence, and I had broken it. My freedom was fragile, yes, but it was also mine. I stopped waiting for apologies from him. They never came. Instead, I gave them to myself, to the child who braided ribbons in secret, to the teenager who swallowed her voice, to the girl who practiced her name in the dark. I forgave her for surviving however she could. That forgiveness was the truest. Justice. Now as I sit in the plaza with my granddaughters running free, skirts swirling like flags, I feel the ache of memory but also deep peace. The chain broke with me. Fear was not inherited. I watched them laugh without shame, and I know surviving was worth it, speaking was worth it, and living fully as Benita is the greatest victory of all. If this story touched you, thank you for staying until the end. Please like, subscribe, and share it. It gives me strength to keep pulling hidden stories into the light. And tell me in the comments, what did you feel hearing my story? Because I learned this through pain, but also through grace. Life only begins when we finally meet ourselves. And I have met myself at last.